Hi there, I'm Ari with the Tech Buyers Guru, and this is the first in a series of videos that will introduce you to the process of building your own high-end PC. A lot of the features that you're going to see in these components are different than what you may have seen a year or two ago. And that means the assembly process is different. So I'm going to be focusing on what it takes to build your own PC in 2019. Now, I do want to take the time to thank the sponsors of this video. A number of manufacturers have provided sample products to be used, many of these fresh off the assembly line, so new in fact that they've just hit the market in the past couple of weeks. I'm going to start with Thermaltake. Thermaltake has provided its Water 3.0 360 ARGB Sync liquid cooler. Now that's a mouthful, but there are a lot of features that are built into this cooler that I'll be discussing once we get to that episode. Also on board are three of Thermaltake's matching Pure 12 ARGB fans. These are the same fans that come on the liquid cooler, but Thermaltake was generous enough to provide these to accessorize the case they provided. Now over here is the Thermaltake A500 case. Like most modern cases, it includes fans, but they said, hey, why don't you show people what it's like to accessorize the case with modern ARGB fans. So that's what we're going to be doing. So the whole system's going to be running with ARGB fans. With one exception, Noctua provided its non-RGB but extremely quiet NF-A12x25 fan. This is considered the quietest fan on the market, and I wanted to be able to give it a test run in the system to show what a different option is for people who aren't as interested in RGB lighting but want the quietest PC available, what they could do, and that's why we have one of these fans to test in this system. Noctua also provided its NT-H2 thermal paste. This is one of the best thermal pastes on the market. It's a brand new product. Noctua's NT-H1 has been around for about a decade and established itself as really the front runner in terms of thermal paste. NT-H2 is significantly better, and I'll be showing you how to apply it once we get to that stage. Also on board is Samsung with its 970 Pro 1TB PCIe M.2 drive. This is the fastest M.2 drive on the market, and that's because it uses MLC flash. That makes it the only SSD on the market to use MLC. And MLC is faster and has higher endurance than what you'll find in any other SSDs on the market. They use TLC or QLC flash. So I do want to thank Samsung for providing this sample. I should note that this is actually the oldest product that's going into this build. Samsung actually has a newer SSD called the Evo Plus, the 970 Evo Plus, but it's not as fast as the 970 Pro. So Samsung actually agreed to send along its best product for this guy. Now, if you saw the preview, you know that I teased this product, but it wasn't actually available yet. Well, just in the past week, Corsair provided a sample of its Dominator Platinum RGB RAM to the Tech Buyers Guru, and I really want to thank Corsair for getting this to us as fast as possible. This is a brand new product, just hit the market. It uses the most advanced RGB lighting available on RAM today, but it's also an extremely high-end kit. This is a DDR4 3600 kit, 4 sticks, adding up to 32 gigabytes. So it's not just flashy, it's actually also really, really fast. So this is going to be quite a treat to use, and I'll also be showing you how to set up the RGB effects on it. Last but not least, we have SilverStone, who has donated the ST1000-PTS. This is the smallest 1000 watt class power supply on the market. Now, if you've been in the PC industry, if you followed along for the past few years, you've probably heard of 1000 watt power supplies. That's not that out of the ordinary. A 140 millimeter long version, that's out of the ordinary. And it's not just a claim to fame that, hey, we made this smaller. Actually, in modern PCs, really large power supplies like the ones that were popular a few years ago don't actually fit that well. And once we get to that stage later in this video of actually installing this power supply in the A500 case, you'll see why. If you had a, say, 200 millimeter long power supply of the same wattage, you'd be regretting it because it's really hard to fit in modern cases that have smaller power supply compartments that tuck away all the cables out of sight. That is really nice aesthetically, but it actually makes it harder to install the power supply, which is why SilverStone's push for miniaturization of the power supply market is actually a really good trend. So I'll be right back with our case and power supply to show you exactly how those components go together. Catch you in a sec. Alright, I'm back with the Thermaltake A500 case. I'm going to show off a couple of its really cool features, and then I'm going to get into the process of setting it up for the assembly of the PC. Now, of course, being a high-end case, it has tempered glass panels. It has them on both sides of the case. It looks cool, and more importantly, it actually makes it a lot easier to get into the case when you want to adjust something or install something. Now, when you're assembling the case, of course, you want to take these off, and this has some really cool offset hinges. They're really easy to remove. Okay, so I just pull that off, and I'm going to set it aside. Hopefully I will not break it in the process. Alright, so we've got those two glass panels. I'll remove the other one in a second because I want that off as well. Now I do want to show a couple of features in this case, as well as some things that I personally am not going to use in this build. So really cool features that you're going to find in a high-end case, and I'll move this a little bit forward here so we can focus in on the case. What you've got here are things like rubber grommets for your cable assemblies to pull through. In fact, we see some of the pre-installed cables coming through here as well. You have rubber grommets here down here as well, and actually that's really important. A lot of cases don't have pass-throughs for cables to come up through the power supply shroud, but this one does right here, and that's a really cool feature because with the power supply now being inside the shroud down here, having that access to those cables coming up rather than through the back is really important, and that's one of the things that is different about a modern case. Again, this power supply shroud changes everything. It changes everything about the way you build the PC. In the past, you might actually have put the power supply in as one of the last components, but now you do it first, and that's what we're going to be doing in just a moment. The other thing I want to show, of course, is this hard drive cage. I'm glad, kind of, that Thermaltake includes it. I have no interest in it, so I'm going to take it out right now. Got my screwdriver. I'm going to show you how this comes out. Hopefully it's pretty easy. And of course, what's so important about this now is that you get much better airflow through the front of the case, right? This chassis has two pre-installed fans. As is common with Thermaltake cases, they're kind of in the wrong place. And I've actually talked to Thermaltake's project manager about this, or they're actually the PR manager, and he doesn't know why they do this. These fans really should be higher in the case because there's very little cooling going on down here where this fan is sending half of its air. Yes, the power supply is down there, but the power supply actually can get air through the bottom of the chassis or through actually the top, depending on how you orient it. I'm going to show you how I orient it when I get to the power supply. But these fans, I'm going to want to take them out. I'm going to take them out, and first thing I'm going to do is move them up. Now in this assembly video, I'm actually going to be replacing them with the RGB fans that Thermaltake provided. But I'm just pointing out that this is a bad default position because you're losing at least 25% of your airflow to, just basically sending it into your cables down below, which is just not a good use of airflow. And also, most of your hot components are going to be in this section of the chassis. That's why you want that wall of air coming through here. So really the only fan doing any good is right here. I'd want to move these up. So I'm going to do that in a moment. Let's flip to the back of the chassis. I'm going to take the panel off, this panel off as well. Now Thermaltake has done a really nice job in terms of bundling these cables from the factory, and there's a lot of them. Even though this case has no RGB, you do have a lot of cables because you have your up on top you have USB Type-C, which is, let's see, one of these is going to be the Type-C. I don't know, one of these blue ones is. Then the other is just the two standard USB 3.0s, and then you also have a USB 2.0, and then your audio and your audio cable, your audio mic and headphone jack, and then you have your front panel connectors here. You also have two fans like I mentioned, these have 3-pin connectors. All right, so they're right here. And there's actually one fan in the back as well. But I like that there's these Velcro management straps and that everything's nicely bundled. Oh, wow, I forgot to mention, look, there's actually 2 more hard drive caddies down here. Let's see if I can get those on camera. So this case comes with 6 hard drive caddies plus this 2.5-inch caddy. That's a lot of hard drive caddies, and I'm going to end up taking these out too. All right, now of course what's in here are the parts. They're secured in here for shipping. Don't forget to take this out. I actually had one reader once return a case because they thought that the manufacturer had forgotten to include the parts. And the parts actually were in the back, in a hard drive caddy, and they hadn't seen it. So don't forget to find your parts. Cases always come with all of the screws for your motherboard mounting. It'll come with motherboard offsets if they're not already pre-installed as they are here. Your hard drives, your solid state drives, and attaching, let's see if, and your power supply as well. That's all in here. So I'm going to pull out this last caddy because I'm not going to be using any of these. I want to free up as much airflow as possible. I'm actually curious if I can pull this whole thing out for even more airflow. I think I can. There's a thumb screw here. I don't know what it does. This is all real time here, guys. Yep, look at that. Very nice Thermaltake. I love it. I love it, Thermaltake. Nice job on this. This whole thing came out. That is something I haven't seen with a lot of other cases. I really like it. Look at that airflow. Look at what you're going to see here. Now you've got tons and tons of space for cable management. You can actually also install a big liquid cooler in front. I'm going to be using the top mount for that. But I really like how modular this is. So again, I'm learning along with you here in terms of what can be removed. I'm stripping this case down, and I'm liking what I'm seeing in terms of the modularity. I'll take this off as well because I am going to be using it. This is the 2.5-inch caddy. I'll take it off because I have to mount my 2.5-inch drive in it. All right. So that's just, you have your 4 screw holes. Like I said, the screws will be included in this white box. I'll attach my solid state drive in here. And we'll go from there at that point. So I'm kind of stripping everything down. Now, another thing that you have to do when you're prepping your case, and I'll get a little closer here again, is you really want to get these cables routed. All right? So I'm going to actually undo these bundles. As much as I like the neat job that Thermaltake has done here, I gotta get these going in different directions. And it sort of has to do with where the connections are for your motherboard. But for instance, this USB 3.0, motherboards don't have connections for USB 3.0 up here. Typically they're going to have to be routed down below. So I'm going to pull this cable down. I'm actually just going to, I really hate to unbundle everything that Thermaltake did here. I really appreciate they did this, but I kind of have to redo it. So let's take a look at what we've got and which are going to go which direction. All right. So we've got 2 USB 3.0s here, right? I don't know which one is. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I see what they're doing here. They have a Type C. They have a Type C connector up top, but it's not a USB 3.1. It's a USB 3.0, and it's this one. Single cable. That's for my single Type C connector. This is the dual USB 3.0. That's for the 2 USB 3.0 Type A connectors. So I actually thought that my motherboard would need a Type C connector. But in the end, this case isn't using a Type C cable, it's using a Type A cable. This is what you look. These are the same connectors. So that is confusing. You don't know that out of the box what your motherboard needs. That is challenging. I think I have to look at the specs again, but the USB 3.1 Gen 2 is what uses the very small connector, which we don't have here. I can't show it to you, although the motherboard I'm using does have it. I'll show it to you when I get to the motherboard episode. You'll see the various USB connectors. So we have two Gen 1 connectors, USB 3.1 Gen 1, if you want to call it that. It was originally USB 3.0, and they called it USB 3.1 Gen 1. I just heard news that they're going to be calling these USB 3.2 Gen 1. When USB 3.2 comes out, don't ask me what they're doing. That makes no sense. Here's my HD audio connector. It's a 9-pin connector. It looks very, very similar to the USB 2.0 connector. All right? So they both use 9 pins, but the arrangement of the 9 pins is different. So don't try to jam your HD audio into a USB header or USB cable into an audio header. They have different pin arrangements. Let's see what else. And then we've got our front panel connectors. These tiny little things that have been used by the PC industry for, I don't know, decades? 30 years? You got your reset switch, your hard drive lights, your power switch, and then your power lights. Okay? Those are all going to be connected to the motherboard right here. So I'm going to want to route those. I also know that the HD audio is always going to be positioned over here. You're always going to see it. Let me back up a little bit. You're always going to have the HD audio connection right here. So I need to thread that down. USB 2.0 can be anywhere on a board. They can be at the top, middle, the bottom. That's going to be right here. So I'm also going to send that down. The USB 3.0s are a little bit more unknown at this point, and I will leave those hanging. So these here, I don't know where they're going to connect yet on the motherboard. I have to look at the motherboard again. So I'll just set those aside over here. I'm going to strap this down, and these cables are going to end up having to be threaded. That's interesting. So let's turn this around again. Well, so this case doesn't have any pass-throughs over here where I usually pass through my HD audio and my USB 2.0 cables. What Thermaltake is expecting you to do is probably to pop them through here, okay, which I'm going to do, and then zip tie them down. So we're going to leave those two cables there. By the way, this bracket is to vertically mount a video card, and it's really cool that Thermaltake includes it. I can remove it, and I actually might later. I'm not going to do it now because I might play with that. I do have Thermaltake's premium PCI extender cable that I could use for this. So I'm going to leave that there for now, but most people will not use this, and there's 3 screws here to make it very simple to remove. So we may remove that at some point. And yeah, the next thing I wanted to do is show you how to remove the front panel. This is something that is complicated on lots and lots of cases, and people get very nervous. They're going to break something. And I'm going to look at this case and see how it works. Oh, that was pretty simple, right? You just have to tug at it, really, and hope that it doesn't pop the plastic. It has these kind of, yeah, that was pretty easy. Came clean off, all right? Nothing broke. It has these little plastic tabs that fit into some little latches here, And actually that was relatively easy. I'm impressed, Thermaltake. Nice job on that. So there it is. I pulled these off. Now remember, I'm going to be removing these fans because first of all, they're positioned incorrectly from the factory. And I'm actually going to be replacing them with 2 Thermaltake fans up here, 2 RGB fans, and then I'm going to use a Noctua fan down here. All right. I still have this in my hand. Look at that. That's solid aluminum. All the way through. This is not just a piece of plastic that has some kind of laminate on it. It is not just a thin layer. That's solid aluminum. And that's one of the reasons this case costs as much as it does. I think it retails for about $250. This is a quality piece of material. That costs money. And, you know, if you don't love the look of it, you may not want to pay for it, but that's why it costs money. All right, so I'm stripping this case down, getting it ready, prepping it for installation of all the parts. I'm going to quickly remove these fans. I'm going to remove the rear fan too. The rear fan is going to have the RGB fan put in its place. The front fans, like I said, are going to have RGB and a Noctua fan. Again, this is fairly simple. We have, from the factory, some nice metal screws that are used to attach into this. This case has pre-drilled fan holes. So while it looks like you can actually install a fan anywhere, Thermaltake really wants you to use these pre-drilled holes. So it's actually pretty simple. That means less work for you figuring out where the fan goes. More work for me figuring out why Thermaltake doesn't use its top mount here, but it is what it is. So out come these factory fans. Oh, the cables are threaded through there. This looks like, this is, I hate to say it, but it's a pretty cheap fan. This is not where the cost of the case is going. This is not, as far as I can tell, this is not a fluid dynamic bearing. This is a cheap fan. My personal opinion is it doesn't really belong in a $250 case. But, again, you saw that, a moment ago you saw that aluminum front panel. You saw the 2 hinged glass panels. They look really, really cool. That's where the cost of this case is coming from. All right, it's not the fans. And the rear fan comes out the same way, I assume. I also assume it's the same cheap fan that's used in the front. No. Okay, so this is using a more typical plastic screw. This is kind of a self-tapping plastic screw. It's a pretty small thing for the camera to focus on. There we go. That's a self-tapping plastic screw. That actually, what that does is it taps right into the plastic frame. So this is a different mounting mechanism than was used in the front. Interesting that Thermaltake used both approaches in the same case. But yeah, this is what you'll see in most cases. I don't like this as much because it kind of chews up your fan, the frame of the fan every time you install it and uninstall it. You know, it kind of, eventually you'll lose the threading inside the fan frame. It'll kind of eat away at it. Okay, that's the last of the cheap fans removed. So anyway, I've stripped this down all the way. That's what the case looks like without any of its, you know, factory installed components. It's just a shell, you know, it's just a frame basically, a high quality frame. Note that the top, these hinges, and the bottom of the case also has aluminum. Oh, one last nice feature I should point out. So on the bottom, you have a nice full-length removable filter. Very, very nice. All the way up and down. That's a nice touch. So you get a lot of cooling air through the bottom of the case. And of course, it has pretty tall feet, which raises the case off the ground. Let's see if I can show that to you. Right? Really high off the ground, which is great for airflow. Particularly if, say, you put this on carpet, a lot of cases would choke off air to the bottom whatever components are down there, but this is raised off enough that you can easily put this on carpet. So let's show you how the power supply gets installed. So again, we have a shroud, and the shroud changes everything about the way you install a power supply. No longer do you want to install it as like the last step of the process because you want your cables in here ahead of time. But also you don't install it from, you certainly can't install it through here, right? This is just a show window here for the label. I can't put it in through the front of the case. I have to put it in through the rear. But more importantly, with these shrouds, with a lot of modern cases, I don't actually even put it in this way. You cannot fit the power supply in this way because of this frame. Other things would get in the way. You actually put it in through the rear. And I think that's actually a pretty cool feature. So this comes with a mount that you attach to your power supply, and then you remove the entire thing and slide it in. Let me get my screwdriver for this last thumb screw. I'm catching a little bit in the metal, okay? So I took out the frame, and I'm going to pick up the power supply here. Now this is the SilverStone ST1000-PTS, and as I mentioned, this is just 140 millimeters long. Let's take a look at how it would fit in this case, right? As you can see, it won't take up much space. I'll have a lot of space for cables, particularly because Thermaltake had a modular hard drive caddy here. That's so cool. I've got so much space for cables, and they'll all be hidden from the front, which is great. So you can be maybe a little bit less careful than you otherwise would, particularly because we've got that extra space. If this were a 200 millimeter 1000 watt unit, which is pretty standard, it'd be out to about here, right? Because of the modularity of this case, that would be okay, unless I needed to use the hard drive cages here, and then I really run out of room fast up here for cables. Now note again, I cannot put it in through here. It goes through the back. You can mount the fan facing up or down in this case because it has vents on both the top and bottom of the power supply shroud. Not all cases have that. In fact, most cases do not have this venting here. I don't know if you can see it from, I'll tip it forward a little bit. There's this nice venting here. That's a really nice touch from Thermaltake. Most cases don't have that. Frankly, it's not necessary because with this case being elevated off the ground so nicely, you're probably better off just having the fan intake from the exterior of the case, because then it gets fresh airflow and is not reliant on airflow coming in through the front of the case, and also won't intake hot air expelled by, say, the video card. I'm going to put this down here into the case. Here's that really nice bracket. I need 4 screws though, right, to attach this. This is where I have to dig through this box, and I'll do that in a minute and come back to you. But I want to point out one thing, very, very important. I've actually had a reader of the website destroy a power supply by taking a screw, and it happened to be the wrong screw. It was a screw that was too long. And he didn't know where to thread it. Okay, there's like lots of holes around this bracket. There's actually 8 possible locations for screws, but only 4 of them are correct, because it has a dual-sided bracket, so you can use it this way or this way depending on if you have your power supply upside down or right side up. But that doesn't mean you can just use any of these holes willy-nilly. If you put it through the wrong hole, like if you put it through a vent hole rather than a screw hole of the power supply, you can actually impact some of the electronics inside, and that's exactly what happened to a reader of the Tech Buyers Guru once. He actually took a screw. It was the wrong screw that he found in the box. He pulled a long screw out, started threading it in, encountered some resistance and kept going, and he just basically drilled into a capacitor. So ruined his power supply. So I am going to be back in just a second with the right screws. All right, I'm back. I dug through the plastic bag of goodies here. This is one area where Thermaltake is maybe behind a little bit in terms of its competition. this is just a giant plastic bag with another plastic bag in it. And that's not the best for organizing parts. Some of Thermaltake's competitors have taken to kind of having coated boxes or even bags where each bag has, say, a different size screw in it. This is just going to become a huge mess in here. I had to rip open this bag, and there's this one Ziploc bag. So you're going to have to, if you're new to PC building and you can't identify a screw right off the bat, you're going to have to look at the manual. See if I can show you this one. So this is the screw that you use to attach the power supply to the mount. It's kind of got a hexagonal look to it a little bit. These, I think it's the only place in the case where you use this type of screw, and it's a very standard, most manufacturers use this style of screw. So we're going to go ahead and do it. Now, depending on the case you use, you may not have this. This is kind of a two-step process, installing the bracket onto the power supply and then installing the power supply into the case. So you may not have that step. It's actually a feature, not a bug. This is actually really cool that I can have that on there, on that bracket, pull it out, and still have these nice captured screws, these nice heavy-duty thumb screws that they're using here. So my power supply's in, and look at how much space I've got here. One other important feature of the SilverStone power supply is that the cable, the label is oriented the right direction. Or is it? Let's take a look. Yes, it is. Here we go. The words are right side up, which is really nice. Now, what's funny is this power supply is so short that this shroud window is actually a little bit longer than the power supply itself. So you kind of got that gap. Aesthetically, that's not ideal, but you know, it's because most power supplies are longer, you know, probably 160 millimeters on average, or 170, so they would close off that gap. But I'm not going to blame really Thermaltake or SilverStone. This is just kind of, as the industry moves forward and moves to smaller and smaller power supplies, case manufacturers are going to have to adapt. And you know, many years ago, maybe a power supply would have been out to here. Well, it's just a slight mismatch on standards, but it's okay. Again, I'm not going to blame either company for this. That's just what happens. At least the label is the right way. I can see my 1000 watts peeking through there, which is really nice. All right, I'm back with a mess of cables. I'll show you them one by one so you know what you should be looking for when you open the box of cables that your power supply came with. There are a lot of them. They can be a kind of a handful. I'm going to start with what is actually the most obvious of the cables. It's the 24-pin cable. One side goes to the power supply. That's the one that says, I don't know if you can see that here, it says PSU. So that's the one that goes on the PSU side. And this one, SilverStone splits its cable because some older motherboards use the 20-pin standard. But anything you buy today is going to use a 24-pin standard, so you're going to want to kind of get the two ends of this cable to fit together like that. All right? So that's my 24-pin. We also have, this is the, I wish it were labeled, but it's not. This is your EPS connector. Okay, I've got two of these. 8-pin to the PSU and a 4+4 pin to your motherboard, because actually in our case, and the motherboard we'll be using, we have an 8-pin and a 4-pin connector, which means we'll use one of these cables with both sides of these connected, and then the other cable, I'm only going to use half of it. I'm going to use the 4-pin, all right? So I'll be using two of these cables. Remember, a lot of power supplies don't actually have two of these, which is a problem if you have a modern high-end PC. Let's see what else I've got. I hate cables. So I like to build systems with as few cables as possible. Unfortunately, our system is going to need to use a SATA power cable for the 2.5-inch drive. You would also need to use this for a hard drive. It's a daisy chain, so it's got 4 SATA power connectors. I'm going to be using one. I may need to use one for the RGB lights. I don't know yet until I get into the build, but I do need at least one of these daisy chains. Last thing I need to show you, of course, is the PCIe connector. SilverStone helpfully color codes this as blue. It's an 8-pin connector, not to be confused with what I just had in my hand, the CPU 8-pin connector. Now, as I mentioned, SilverStone uses a dual-headed cable for its PCI. You see, you get two 6 plus 2-pin connectors. And the reason these are split are similar to the 24-pin motherboard connector. Some video cards require 6, some require 8. Of note, the 6-pin PCIe connector provides 75 watts of power. The extra 2 pins add another 75 watts. All right, so we will be using all of these cables for our video card, which has 2 8-pin inputs. In my hand, I've got the PCIe, and that's easy because it's color-coded. By the way, not all manufacturers do this. SilverStone does that for the PCIe cable, so that goes in easily. I've got my dual-headed cables at the end. That's all I'm going to need for this build. Next up, I'm going to do the really large motherboard cable. That's the 24-pin. Remember, this has a split end on the other end. That's the one that goes into the motherboard. All right? The one that's a solid 24-pin connector goes into the power supply. I put it right here. Snap it in. Okay, done. Next up, I've got 2 EPS connectors. Again, these are split 2 and 2 4-pin connectors. But at this end, it's an 8-pin connector. And I've got 2 of them, so I'm going to put one here and the other one right next to it. One of these is quite a bit longer than the other, which will impact my cable routing. All right, one has a lot more reach than the other. I'm actually going to switch this. I'm going to give the shorter cable just a couple extra millimeters by putting it in the closer position. All right, it's not going to help that much. Look, if this cable's too short, I'm out of luck. We're going to find out. We'll see if it reaches, but SilverStone has used this because it's anticipating you may have a smaller case. We'll see how that works out. I've got one more input uncovered here. Well, I got 2 actually. I wasn't sure how many SATA power cables I need. I actually think I'm only going to need 1. I put it in here. You can use any of them. Note that I'm using, when I have the option, I always use the cable connector that's closest to the end here, so that my cables don't have to reach quite as far across, okay? Because this is going to be against the shroud, and I'm going to have to bring all the cables out this way. So I have bundled them all on the right side of the power supply. All right, now I've got to slide this back into my chassis, right? It's a little bit tricky because I've got this huge bundle of cables now. Got to feed those through this hole here. Pull them through. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Drop my power supply back into the back of the chassis with those cables attached. It's a little messier. You could see if I had a much longer power supply, this would start to get pretty awkward. I'd have this potentially pushing up against a hard drive cage, but I've got plenty of space in this particular build. I'm just going to tighten down one of these screws to make sure my power supply doesn't pop back out while I'm cabling it up. I'll do the rest of the screws later. So now I've got a big mess of cables over here, right? Let's sort them out. This is my long CPU connector. That's going to go, I'm going to want to route that back of the chassis up through this hole. This hole is actually designed for your EPS connector. So I got one. The problem is going to be the second one. I'm just going to hang that up there. Eventually I'll route it a little bit better. Okay. The second one is going to be more challenging. This is quite a bit shorter. Does it reach? Well, not if I route it through the back. Not if I want a really neat cable routing. That's not going to work. I'm going to have to go straight across the back of the motherboard. All right? So that one won't look as good. That's going to be like this. And there's really no way around it. Maybe I can strap it down over here. Remember, my solid state drive is going to be there. We'll see. The good news is it's long enough to work in this case. If you got a really big case, a really tall case, it might not, but here it's okay. This one I'm going to probably want to get out of the way by routing it back here. Yeah, actually, you know what? I think I can do both of them this way, so that's pretty nice. They'll both be like this. All right. I'm going to try to tuck it back in there. Good. SATA power doesn't have very far to go. This is my SATA power cable. The SATA drive is going to be right here. So these, I'm actually going to end up taking a probably zip tie and bundling this up so that it sits right down here and just connects directly into my SSD right here. This is, you know, I don't need that many connectors. I don't want that many connectors, but I've got that many. So I'm going to have to bundle that up. But I'll take care of it later. It's not a problem. Next, we have our 24-pin motherboard connector. I don't have the motherboard in yet, but I do know that the motherboard connector is going to be up here. And I kind of want this inside these straps, so I'm going to... I want these cables to kind of lay down flat here. And the motherboard connector is probably going to be up here. So I'm going to actually have it come out through this grommet here. Oops, the grommet's falling out because of the size of that cable. Okay, let's get that through there. I could actually strap that down as well. So this is not exactly a tutorial on cable management, but you can see in theory where you have the opportunity to get things neater or less neat, depending on your abilities and your patience. Now this is my PCIe power cable. My video card is going to be lined up right over here. I want it to come out over here. So I'm actually going to put it through the grommets and then I'll Velcro it down. Get that through there. Okay. And then I want it Velcroed down here. And I want to tuck some of it back under the shroud. That's the nice thing about having all this cable management space. I can just tuck those cables in. I'm gonna end up doing the same thing with these SATA cables, as a matter of fact. I'm gonna basically shove these back in to the space. This is just dead space. That's why I really don't want or care that much about a fan blowing air in here. This is just cables in here. This SATA cable is going to attach to a SATA drive right here. I don't need any more length. Eventually I'll strap these down. And let's turn this around so you can see. I've got my motherboard 24 pin here. I've got my dual 8 pins here. Got my video card cables here. And of course my front panel connectors here. I'm done. My power supply and my case is ready for installation of the motherboard. Now I did promise that I would show you how to install a custom fan. So I'm going to do that before we wrap up. I've got a Noctua fan here. A very short cable, by the way. I just noticed it's pretty short. I'm going to put it right here. Now, interesting rule of thumb for fans is that the direction of airflow on a fan is always in the direction of the grill. Okay? So the airflow is always going to be from the front. The hub is the front and the grill is the back. That's a rule of thumb. That's true of any fan. If you see the hub, you know that that's where you want, that's your intake. All right? Grill is exhaust. So I want this facing the front of the case. Pretty simple. The only thing I need to be aware of is where this cable is going to go. I don't want it, I think it might get pinched in here. No, there's enough space. Oh, good. So I'm going to mount this Noctua fan here. Now, one of the reasons I'm choosing to mount the Noctua fan at the bottom of the case is that the RGB effects of the other fans are more important to have up inside the main chassis, right? Whereas down here, I'm not as concerned about lighting, all right? Although you would be able to see it. When you're looking at it from afar, you're going to see lights over here. And down here, I'll have my Noctua. Now, yeah, of course I could have all matching fans, but the other reason the other thing I'm going to use this for is to have the Noctua fan be the only constantly on fan. I'm going to have these fans shut off. This Noctua fan is essentially silent, even under load. So it's going to be the only fan I have running at idle, if I can set up the fan controls ideally. So that's why I'm going to have this one down here. And I hate to say it, but it's obvious. The Noctua fans are not the most attractive, so I don't want it really out in the middle of the case where it's very, very visible. I'm sorry, Noctua, I know you worked very hard on this fan, but the color is still not that attractive. Okay, I've got these Thermaltake screws that go through here. I'm just going to do one so I can get it in place and then move on. Okay. Remember that a lot of, remember that a lot of cases won't use these machine screws. They'll just rely on screws that tap into the metal. Now, I've encountered a problem already. Let's see if this will work. These screws are a little bit short because the Noctua fan has these rubber grommets, or these rubber anti-vibration pads. It actually worked out, but the screws were just long enough to reach through the fan and into the pre-machined holes. So that's in. My fan is mounted. I may have a little bit of trouble with, yeah, you know what? I'm going to actually have to change the orientation of this fan because my cable isn't going to be long enough to reach the motherboard. There's my cable. Okay, these are all things that, you know, you can plan out or you could try it out. I'm doing this all live, so you learn along with me. This cable's not going to reach my motherboard. So I'm going to flip this fan over so that the cable comes out the top. All things, you know, to consider. Luckily, it's only going to take me 30 seconds to reverse out this small error. I'm going to flip this fan around, and I'm going to show you that in this position, it may be long enough. The motherboard's going to be out here. Yeah, it'll probably reach that fan, fan header. I believe that Noctua included an extension cable. I want as little cable as possible, so if I can get by without using an extension cable, I will. Okay, now I'm going to install one Thermaltake fan just so you see what it looks like. I think yeah, I have it right here. Now, this is an RGB fan, so it has a lot more cabling, right? It's got its, this is the power for the 4-pin header. It's a PWM 4-pin. But then I also have all this mess of cables for my RGB. And I will show how to set up RGB later. I'm not going to unbundle this yet. But the PWM, look, notice how long this cable is. A very different approach from Thermaltake versus what Noctua does. Noctua includes an extension cable. Thermaltake just gives you a really, 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 really long cable. Okay, I don't know how you'd ever need that much cable, but two different approaches. I'm going to bundle this back up because I definitely don't need that much cable. Remember, now in the back of the chassis, I'm required to use the tapping screws. Okay, and again, let's think about the airflow. At the back of the chassis, I want it to exhaust out the back. Here's my grill, air's coming that way. I don't want to mount it with the fan blades facing the back because then it's going to work as an intake. Okay, fan blades and the hub That's your intake side. This is your exhaust side. So I want it like this. And now I need to get those self-tapping screws that will, unfortunately, bite into my fan a little bit and kind of make it less than pristine, but that's what I have to do. And another thing I want to point out is I'm mounting this as low as possible. Okay, this is adjustable, right? I could put it up here, I could put it down here, but I know that I'm going to have a liquid cooler up here. I want to make as much room as possible for that installation when I get to that point. I can always raise it later. All right, so I've got my screws in hand. Try to tap it a little bit with my fingers, and then I'll actually mount it. It takes a lot of force. I just had a reader actually write to me on the website forum and say, hey, my fan came with screws that don't fit in the screw holes. Well, if you're not familiar with how these work, you might say, gosh, that's not fitting, right? I actually have to use a lot of force to tap into the plastic frame of that fan. Okay, so just something you have to be aware of. And a first-time PC builder wouldn't know. I have to actually basically drill in to the plastic frame of this fan, and that's what I just did by hand with a screwdriver. Now we've got that fan installed. That's going to look really nice. That's going to be RGB lit. It's going to really add a lot to this case, but I do have tons and tons of cabling coming off of it. I'm going to deal with the RGB cables later. This is the power cable. I'm going to probably end up, we'll see. Typically what I like to do is route it down here. It'll go behind the video card. There's nothing kind of to perch it on right now since there's no video card in the chassis. This thing is going to be, this RGB cable is probably going to have to be fed through the top and then back out behind the motherboard, and then there'll be some connections back there I'll have to make. I'm just going to leave it hanging for now, but I just want you to know in the end it doesn't actually connect anywhere over here. It's going to need to go through the back. So that's it. This case is ready. I'm going to install 2 more fans. Off camera, you don't need to see me do that. But otherwise, this case is ready for the next step, which will be installing the motherboard. But before I get to that, in my next episode, I'm actually going to put the case aside and show you how to install a CPU and RAM in your motherboard, as well as the solid-state drive. And those are all done outside of the case. So I will be back soon with episode 2, focusing on the motherboard and the installation of all the components that go into it. Then, in episode 3, we'll return to this case and the power supply, get everything connected, and we may have an episode 4 and an episode 5 down the line. Until then, please do like and subscribe if you like this video and you want to see additional content. That tells me that I have an audience that's interested in what I'm doing and is learning something from the process, as I am as well. Again, I'm Ari Altman from the Tech Buyers Guru, and I'll catch you next time.